Well, hello there everybody. I am just showing you the block I'm going to be working on. This is Bradie here from Sparrow Quilt Company, and this is the little block I am about to make with my handy dandy guidelines for quilting rulers. So I have removed the finger guard from the guidelines ruler, and I am going to put on one of my seam allowance add-ons. So these are the finished sized quilting add-ons, and what they do is provide the seam allowance for us. So in the block I just showed you, you can see that there's 3 columns. I want to make a block that's 12 inches finished. So each column has to be 4 inches finished because we've got 3 separate columns. So I have set my little slider on my guidelines ruler at the 4-inch mark. Now I'm going to add the seam allowance for a 1/4 square triangle. Now if you didn't know, the seam allowance for a 1/4 square triangle is 1.207, which is a really awkward measurement, and there's no way to just add it with your typical quilting ruler. So that's where the benefit of these rulers comes in. We can add that 1.207 with this, and we're still just lined up with the 4 on our ruler. I'm just going to put a little bit of moisture on those little silicone suction cups, and I just turned those little black levers to lock it in place. We'll push down on the suction cups, and now that seam allowance ruler has been added to my guidelines ruler. And I knew it was my 1/4 square triangle because it's got the little Q at the top. That's what gave that away. So now I've got my fabric all laid out. I'm going to line up the 4-inch marking with the raw edge of my fabric, and I'm going to go ahead and make that cut here. So now what I'm going to do is turn this sideways, and I'll trim off the selvage first. And then I'm going to cut a square next. And again, I'm just going to line up with the 4 on the raw edge of the fabric. This adds my seam allowance. And then I just take that square and I cut it twice on the diagonal, and that will give me the 1/4 square triangles that I need for the center of that block we showed you at the beginning. So I'm just going to cut from point to point. I'm going to try not to disturb that. Turn it to the horizontal and cut again. Got to be careful not to move things around too much. There we go. All right, so I did 2 layers of fabric there. I've got 8 little 1/4 square triangles. Now I'm going to cut my contrasting color in this nice dark pink. I'm going to do the exact same thing that I just did. So I've left the same seam allowance ruler on there, and I'm going to cut at the 4-inch marking again. The seam allowance is added by the add-on. Turn it sideways and get rid of that selvage. And then we can cut our square. That's trash. One more cut. And then this one again will cut into 4 on the diagonal, just like the light pink. Line that ruler up point to point. Make that cut. Let's push those back together, and then we'll go on the horizontal. All right, so now I've got all my 1/4 square triangles for my center of my block. What I need to do now is cut these other little outer points of this little pinwheel star. So now I'm going to cut half square triangles. I'm going to take that same strip that I was just using. This time I'm going to take off the quarter square add-on and I'm going to add the half square add-on. That little suction is really attached. So this ruler has the H at the top. That means it's the half square triangle. Pop that on there. Just turn my levers so that it locks in place and push my suction cups on. There we go. I'm still leaving this at 4 because we want everything based off the 4. We know that's how wide our each column of the block is going to be. Sorry, it escaped my brain there for a minute. So now I'm going to just make this strip a little more narrow. And again, we'll open it up. For half square triangles, I just need 1. At least 1 square worth. So now I'm cutting my square and then I'm going to cut it in half on the diagonal. I'm going to go this way because it's behaving a little better. That corner needs to be pressed. Okay, corner to corner. And now I've got another stack of triangles that are going to be my star points. Let's do that again with the light pink. Thank you, Elle. 2. I actually need 3 of those in total. Sorry, guys. So I'm going to cut 1 more. Better do it now so I don't have to come back to it. I'm doing the dark pink in the outer corners as well. Again, we'll turn it so we can cut it point to point, corner to corner, on the diagonal at least. So you can see I have now got the block all laid out. I also cut my background fabric in white using the half square triangle cutting technique that I used on the larger triangles. Now I'm going to piece this all together and I'll be back in just a moment to show you the finished block. So now we've got our friendship star all cut out and we're ready to put it together. I do suggest starting with the center block. We're going to sew those quarter square triangles together first. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I was telling you all last week that when I put together 2 quarter square triangles, I like to start at that right angle. I always start sewing with that square edge versus this narrow point edge, and I find that my feed dogs handle that beginning easier than they handle that really narrow tip. Sometimes that just gets jammed down into your bobbin area and kind of ruins that fabric because it's quite delicate, and so I like to start with that square edge because it's sturdier and it just seems to handle it better than that narrow little point. Lining those edges back up. They shifted a wee bit on me there. Okay. So I'm going to press these towards the darker pink, and when I sew the other half I'll do the same, and then that will make my seams nest into one another really nicely when it's time to join that entire block together. So we'll do this one next. Line up that square corner. We're trying to create little units that are going to sew together like a 9 patch. I like to treat each little block almost like a quilt. I'm going to sew the units together in rows, and then I'm going to sew my rows to each other. And that's what I mean by treating it like a full quilt, because we always sew our rows together, and then we join the rows to each other, and that just seems to make it go together nicely. So now this seam is pointing to the dark pink, that to the dark pink. That's going to make those seams nest really nicely when I join them together. If I had a fork pin handy, I would just pin on either side of that intersection, but I'm just going to carefully pin it with a single so that holds my intersection together. I really, really like it when things line up properly. Let's get rid of those right now. I have no choice but to start with that narrow point this time, but I'm just going to take my time as I begin. And sometimes starting with your needle down is helpful as well. I had a suggestion last week from a viewer who said use the beginners, the leaders and enders system, where you put a little scrap of fabric under there first. I have never done that. I'm going to have to try it one of these days because I've had so many people make that suggestion to me. So let me know, do you use leaders and enders when you are stitching together a project? I know a lot of people do, and then they can get a whole second project pieced while they're working on their main project, which kind of sounds brilliant to me. This one, it doesn't matter. I'm just pressing to whichever one is on top. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to join all these half square triangles, and I'm going to press always away from the white fabric. So bear with me while I get zooming through this. There she goes. Slow and steady wins the race. Go ahead and just do all four corners, kind of chain piece them. Maybe that will make me go a little faster. You're finding that that last point is going astray as you feed it through your sewing machine, you can get yourself a fine tipped awl. That's AWL, a tailor's awl, or you can use a stiletto. And that is just a fine little tip that helps you control your fabric as it gets under the presser foot there. And that helps keep your piecing a lot more accurate. There we go. I like to chain piece. It seems to make things go a little faster, not wasting quite as much thread. I mean, I've got tons of thread, but there we go. Come on, get going. There it is. Sometimes it just takes a second for those feed dogs to actually grab the fabric and start moving it, but just be patient. All right, these two are also dark pink, so let's feed them through. We're gonna have about 6 dark pink with white half square triangles here in a second. One more, and then we can move on to the light pinks. Just had a little visitor there. Little 6-year-old visitor. It's almost always a kid running around here. There we go, especially in the summertime. Okay, so let's take these off now and we will press them. And then we can see how that block is looking. Oops. I just love that thread cutter on my machine. Makes it handy for that kind of job. Right, so we're going to press with the dark fabric on top, set the thread into the seam first, and then we'll open that up. I like to pile my pressing on top of the last pressing, and then it just makes that bottom piece get pressed all the more. Sometimes it seems like they just don't get flat enough. One of my viewers from last week asked about steam or starch, and I don't often use that as I don't pre-wash my fabrics. The trouble is, if you start using steam or starch on fabrics which are unwashed, the shrinkage is going to happen while you're pressing, and then it's not going to fit with your other unwashed pieces. So I prefer to stay away from starch and steam unless I have pre-washed my fabrics. If something just is not behaving and needs starch or steam, I will definitely go ahead and do it, but as a rule, I avoid it. If I've pre-washed, I almost need the starch. There's a lot of sizing and chemicals in our unwashed fabrics that make them easy to work with, and that's why I prefer not to pre-wash. Let's put these all back, and then we can do our light pinks, and then we can put our whole block together. This needs to go that way, and that one goes that way. Next is light pink. Only 2 left, and then we'll put our whole block together. I think I just, hey? Sure. I think I just noticed that the dots on the light pink are smaller than the dots on the big pink, on the dark pink. Not that they're actually smaller, they're closer together. That's what it is. Those 2 apart and press them. Do these the same way with the print fabric on top so that we can press the seam towards that print. Oh gosh, come on. I got an uncooperative half square triangle. Right, so now that all those little units are together, we have ourselves a 9 patch. Now I'm just going to join together the rows, but first I'm going to take a picture. While you're filming? Yeah. Really? That's pretty cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew these together. This worked out nicely because pressing towards my darker fabric made my seams nest just perfectly. And that reduces the bulk in the seams. which is nice for later when we're quilting this all together. And it keeps our intersections lined up really well. Now, let's add on this piece. We got nothing to line up here, so we can just go ahead and sew without pins. Make sure that edge is lined up, and here we go. Now the very center of this entire block has a lot of seams, so I'm going to want to press those seams away from center. And because I like to alternate, that means these top and bottom rows are going to press towards center. So I'll start with that block on top, set the seam, flip that open. Figure out. I'm always grateful when I'm using a pattern if the pressing instructions are included, because then I don't have to think or figure it out. Line up this corner so that it all stays nice, so that my intersection stays good. I'll pin at that corner and stitch down this side. Oh, come here. Now, if you are finding that your little individual units are not all the same size, I do recommend squaring them all up to the same size before piecing them together, and you'll find that you'll just get better results, that everything is going to look better, and then you won't have any excess fabric in one block or the other. Just gives us a better shot at being accurate. Now that pin adds a lot of bulk. If you want to start sewing from the opposite corner and work towards that bulky corner, that's fine too. It might be easier. It doesn't really matter which direction you sew from. And you don't have to pin it either. That's just my preference. That just adds another layer of thickness in there that has to go under the presser foot, which isn't always easy to manage. Ooh. Yes, that's a pretty pink phone. Some people like to trim off all those little dog ears in the corners that result from triangles. If you like to, go ahead. They don't bother me too much, but sometimes I will take them off. Okay, one last little square, and then we can join our rows together. Now that does have an intersection, so I'm going to pin that to make sure that it lines up properly. That was a pin, yeah. If I had been sewing fast, it probably would have broken something, but I always sew slowly over pins to avoid any breakage. And it's pretty rare that I break any needles or pins. I won't say it's never happened. So this one we're pressing towards center again. There we are. Okay, so now I've got 3 little rows, and I'm just going to join those to each other. And before I know it, I'm going to have a friendship star. So if you are thinking of making this block, just choose 2 fabrics that have got a really good contrast for your star portion, and then if you just want to put it on white or gray or something neutral, but you definitely want something that has got a high contrast to those first 2 fabrics that you've chosen for the star. Keep that 1/4 inch nice and accurate, and then you won't cut off any of your points. Star just isn't the same when its points are cut off. All right, let's press this towards the upper row. Away from that bulky center with all those intersections. Now hopefully you've been watching all along, but if you want to find more of these mystery sampler videos, you can check us out on our website at sparrowquiltco.com, or you can join us here on Facebook every Wednesday at 10:30, that's Mountain Time. And we also do a different quilting series on Friday mornings where we do stash busters, where we do free quilting patterns and make a complete quilt. This one we're just doing 1 block at a time. But we'll have a great sampler at the end of the summer. And you will learn all kinds of new blocks through this series. So make sure you visit us at sparrowquiltco.com, put in your name and email so that you can get the PDF pattern emailed to you each week, so that you can join us in the sewing fun. And my goal is always for you to just use up what you've got on hand. You don't need to go out and shop for this. You should have plenty of fabric in your stash, I imagine, that you can use up. And this is going to look great scrappy. It doesn't have to be so organized like mine is. Use whatever you've got. All right, so let's get these pins out of here and we can see this finished friendship star block. Oh yay. Always digging at the points to make sure they're still there. And it looks really good. It turned out really, really great. So there it is, my finished friendship star block. You're welcome. Don't forget, join us at sparrowquiltco.com. Sign up for the PDF patterns. We'll mail them to you. We'll email them to you every week, along with a reminder about this video, which is every Wednesday morning at 10:30 a.m. Hopefully you'll just remember to join us on Facebook and watch along and join in the fun. If you can't join us at 10:30 a.m., no problem. I understand it. We've all got busy lives. The videos will be available later in the day, and they will just live on the website, live on YouTube. You'll be able to watch them at any time. So don't worry, you're not going to get behind. Just tune in a little bit later and join in on the fun. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day, and bye for now. We'll see you next week.